Good morning and welcome to another Monday edition of How to Improve Your Grades the 1% Way. This is how to improve either your standards check or your Part 3 test bit by bit, piece at a time. You cannot go really from 0 to 51 all in one hit. The idea being that we're going to take each of the competencies and see how you can maybe gain just 1 point extra in each one of these. Eventually, of course, if you get 1 in all of them, you will get 17 extra points. If you're already getting 20, blah, blah, blah. And then just go around again and keep there. My name's Dave Foster. If you don't know me, look me up. Use Dave Foster, MA-DIPDI. There's plenty of stuff on my website. The address at the top there, DTE-Elite. Well, this is part 11 of the series so far. We're coming to an end gradually. Today we're looking at, was the agreed lesson structure appropriate for the pupil's experience and ability? A little one really, but very, very important. When I first started to look at this again, I thought there's really not much to it. There's not a lot to it, but suddenly you realise how vitally important it is, and more so how it fits in and makes sense with many of the other competencies. But let's look at the sentence itself. The DVSA competency says, was the agreed lesson structure appropriate for the pupil's experience and ability? I often like to look at the sentence and think, well, okay, what were they exactly looking for? This competency is found in the lesson planning section, which tends to make you think of doing a lot of it before the lesson happens. So in the planning stage, when you're thinking of all your learners really, not just your one on your part 3 or your standards check, you need to give a few moments and think, so, how am I going to plan this lesson? And that, although it comes in with planning, this really is the result of planning. Score low on this, you're probably going to score low on planning. And I've often said how many of the competencies link to each other. However, some changes may be needed during the lesson as well, so you need to plan for these. If you imagine, if you change the lesson, you're then swapping the lesson, so there's a new lesson, you may need a new plan, but many of these plans can be changed before or planned for before the lesson starts. Let's look at the 4 keywords in the sentence: agreed, appropriate, experience, and ability. Now, I'm not going to look at them in that order, and there's a reason for that. Because I realised that, well, let's go through it here. First of all, let's look at appropriate. Appropriate. Well, during the planning lesson, you need to think at what level your pupil is based at, or what that pupil is experienced, not the pupils you did yesterday or the pupil you're going to do tomorrow. There isn't a one size fits all, and I don't think we really plan for the individual learnings enough, and this is where this comes in. If you get the level, if you get the lesson right for that pupil, experience and ability, then it will be appropriate. So even these words fit within each other. So the experience then, well, what's that based on? Well, what has your pupil covered so far? Where are they in their course of tuition? What is the next logical step for that pupil, etc., which is, we cover this in planning really, but based on the pupil's location, the pupil's syllabus, what the pupil would like to do, what you feel is next to help with the structure and the pupil's ability goal. And also the ability comes into this, during the past lessons, how has your pupil coped with the lessons? Do they struggle? Do they zoom through lessons? Do they have learning difficulties in some way? How do you normally cope with that learner? But remember, expect surprises, because they do happen, particularly on part 3 and a standards check. But are they a fast, average or slow learner? There's many, many different variables to that. As I say, we talked about learning difficulties. You might need to incorporate that into your learners. So how do you normally set lessons for this pupil? And I'm hoping that we just have a one size fits all for our lessons and they all do the same. There should be for each pupil given just a few minutes where you think about this pupil's lessons. For me, it was just before I picked the pupil up, possibly when I was sitting outside the house, or 2 minutes around the corner, because I didn't want the pupil panicking. And I might just give it a couple of minutes and look at where the pupil is, look at their lesson records, and think, what am I going to do with this pupil today? What can I do specifically for this learner that would improve them? So, as I said, we cover this well. And it comes really in the planning at the beginning of a lesson. Now, with a standards check and a part 3 check, a lot of this planning I would be spending some time thinking about my learner, thinking about these different things, and thinking about how I would change the lesson for that particular learner. As a novice instructor, you will find this will take some time to do, putting each individual learner. But hey, you know, that's what we're doing. This is what we're learning. This is what we're training to do. Gradually, it becomes easier and easier, and you can whittle it down to sort of 2 or 3 minutes before the lesson. But it needs to be done. It's not just a one size fits all. Okay, right, I'm gonna have a look at the football between lessons, and right, okay, I'll turn up at the pupil's lesson, and bang, we're in for a lesson. You know, it needs to give some thought to it. And therefore, and I put the agreed last, although it's first in the sentence, because was the agreed lesson, it says was the agreed lesson, which means you need to talk to it at the beginning with your pupil. So you need to agree it with your pupil at the beginning. And also, if you change the plan, you need to agree it with your pupil. The examiner may or may not hear you do this at the beginning of the lesson, because currently with the structure you might do all this before you actually pick the examiner up. But if you change the lesson, the examiner is certainly going to be listening for that agreement with the pupil over what you're going to do next. So, and this is fitting in with your objectives or your goals, whatever you call them, etc., and the pupil's needs for that lesson. So again, you can see how it all ties in. If you don't agree these structure, you won't be setting the goals. You're ending up scoring low in your planning, low in was the agreed structure appropriate, etc., etc., and possibly low in did you set the goals for the pupil, etc. So one simple fault can really have a knock-on effect through many of the competencies. It's important we understand each one. So this week, your focus is on the experience and ability of your pupils. What I really want you to do is, before each lesson, think, how does this pupil differ from my others? Spend a few moments thinking about it, writing notes down if you're the sort of person that writes notes down. How could you change today's lesson for this pupil? How might this pupil differ from maybe the lesson you gave earlier today, or the lesson yesterday, or the lesson last week? What happened in last week's lesson with this pupil? What could you do differently? And it's about structuring it specifically for them. Then agree those objective goals with your pupil. Agree them. Well, a fairly simple one really for this week, I think, but it does have a knock-on effect through all of them, and it really is important. Next week, we're going to look at were directions and instructions given in good time. I've given a little thought to this one already for this thing, and there's probably a few surprises in there as well. Remember, I said it in the planning of a lesson, etc., and route planning, etc., this important phrase, planning, 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 and then you're able to be spontaneous. If you think, what would I do if my pupil did a good lesson? What could I do to change for them? If it went wrong, what could I do? How could I meet my pupil's needs, etc.? And then, of course, when you've got all that there, when something does happen, you can be spontaneous. And next week, as I said, we're going to talk about directions in good time. Apologies, always put in a little bit of a shameless plug, as I call it, really. At this stage, it's completely for you, but you know, many of you will know that I wrote books, etc. You just get a picture of it there. If you want a little bit of help with this, completely up to you, then pop over to my website, DTE-Elite, and look for the 31 complete lesson plans, or the lesson planners there. They are written following the standards. Sometimes it can take just a lot of the work out of it for you, leaving you to get on with teaching them, and they work really well with these series. Well, that's it today. Look forward to speaking to you next week, where we will look at the next section. Have a good week. Please feel free to comment. Tell me how you're doing, what you're doing, etc. Any notes at all. Please feel free to share these videos with anybody you think might benefit, or just share them. Thank you very much. Speak to you all next week. Bye bye for now.